3 to 4 billion birds die every year in North America. You have almost never seen a single one of them die. Tonight, we find out why. Cardinals at the feeder, robins crossing the lawn, chickadees working the branches one by one. Hundreds of visits, maybe thousands over the years. I know this yard. I've watched one just like it. Now think about how many dead birds you've found. 1, maybe 2, a window strike once. A cat, maybe. But the math doesn't work. A backyard chickadee lives on average 2 to 3 years in the wild. Your yard hosts dozens of birds. Turnover is constant. Where are the bodies? The answer is one of the most quietly extraordinary things happening in your yard right now. And once you understand it, you will never look at a living bird the same way again. I've been watching birds for years, and I remember the first time this question actually stopped me. I'd been filling the same feeder for 3 years. I knew the birds by their markings. I'd watched them through winter and summer and back again. And one morning I realized I had never found a single one of them dead. Not one. I started looking into it. What I found, heard from ornithologists, from long-term field studies, from wildlife researchers, was not what I expected. It wasn't just that birds hide when they die. It's that they are built, from the cellular level up, to disappear. Dr. Frank Gill, former president of the American Ornithological Society and author of Ornithology, the field's standard university textbook, now in its 4th edition, has documented avian mortality patterns across decades of peer-reviewed research. What his work and the work of dozens of field ornithologists confirms is this: the absence of dead birds in your yard is not an accident. It is a system. A precise, ancient, almost invisible system that operates in your yard every single day. Let's take it apart. The first thing to understand is that most birds do not die suddenly. They decline. And they feel that decline before any external sign appears. Birds operate on metabolic rates that make human physiology look slow. Their hearts beat hundreds of times per minute. Their body temperatures run between 104 and 108 degrees Fahrenheit. They process everything faster than we do, including the early signals of illness, injury, and deterioration. When a bird begins to fail, it knows. Take the northern cardinal. A healthy male cardinal is vigilant, alert, constantly scanning. When a cardinal begins to decline, illness, parasites, injury, the first thing that changes is not visible to most observers. It's behavioral. He visits the feeder less, he sits lower in the brush, he stops singing. These are not random changes. They are the cardinal redirecting every available unit of energy towards survival. Non-essential behavior, singing, display, territorial patrol, is suspended. He is conserving. When a cardinal dies, its mate finds the body. Within hours, sometimes less, she has moved on. No mourning period, no lingering. The flock restructures around the absence before the day is out. The black-capped chickadee does something more deliberate. Chickadees that are failing, and research from the Cornell Lab's long-term banding studies confirms this, withdraw from the flock. They stop participating in the contact calls that keep the flock together. They find a cavity, a specific cavity, often one they have used for roosting before, and they go inside. A 12-gram bird in a dark hollow is almost invisible to every predator in your yard. It is also invisible to you. The American robin takes a different approach. Most American robins don't die in your yard at all. They die in transit, in open agricultural fields during spring and fall migration, hundreds of miles from the yard where you watched them pull worms last summer. The yard you watched them in was never where they were going to die. It was just a stop along the way. Here is the part that most people never consider. You have watched crows work your fence. You have seen hawks clear your feeder in a single pass. You thought you were watching predators. You were watching the cleanup crew. Even if a bird dies in the open, even if it falls in your garden bed or on your lawn, what happens next is almost instantaneous. Your yard is not a neutral space. It is a fully operational ecosystem, with systems of removal that have been running for millions of years. Crows and blue jays are the first responders. A 2015 study led by Scott Loss in Nature Communications, one of the most comprehensive mortality analyses ever conducted, identified the leading causes of direct bird mortality in the United States: windows, cats, vehicles, power lines, in that order. Research by Dr. John Marsluff at the University of Washington, the same researcher who documented that crows recognize individual human faces, has shown that corvids monitor their territories with extraordinary attention. A crow can detect an unusual stillness in a yard, the absence of movement where movement is expected, and investigate within minutes. A small bird that dies in the open will typically be located by a crow or jay within an hour, often less. Sharp-shinned hawks and Cooper's hawks, the same species that empty your feeders when they pass through, patrol territories that include your yard on a regular circuit. They are looking for exactly what a dying bird produces: slow movement, low alertness, predictable position. A bird that is failing and has not yet found cover is, to a hawk, the most visible thing in your yard. This is not cruelty, it is precision. The raptor removes what the ecosystem can no longer sustain, and it does it fast. What predators miss, the ground takes. A small bird, a chickadee, a sparrow, a wren, weighs between 10 and 25 grams. In warm weather, insects locate a carcass within hours. Domestic beetles, blowflies, ants. Within 48 hours, most soft tissue is gone. Within a week, in summer conditions, almost nothing visible remains. The feathers break down more slowly, but they scatter. Wind moves them. Rain presses them into soil. A bird that died in your yard last Tuesday may have left no physical trace by the following Monday. This is not an exception. This is the rule. In 2019, a landmark study published in the journal Science, led by Dr. Kenneth Rosenberg at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, calculated that North America has lost approximately 3 billion birds since 1970. 3 billion. And the causes are not mysterious. They are documented. That is not a typo. Nearly 30% of the total bird population of North America, gone in 50 years. Species that were common in your grandparents' yards. Species your parents would have recognized immediately. Gone from the landscape at a scale that is almost impossible to visualize, and yet as we see almost none of it, because the system that removes individual birds from sight also obscures the broader disappearance. The yard gets quieter. The feeder gets fewer visitors. The dawn chorus in April is a little thinner than it was. But there are no bodies, so it is easy not to notice. That is the most important thing I can tell you today. The absence of dead birds in your yard is not evidence that everything is fine. It is evidence that the removal system is working. What it cannot tell you is whether the birds that should be there are still alive somewhere else. So what do you do with this? 3 things: specific, actionable, starting today. First, pay attention to behavioral changes, not just presence. You now know that a bird in decline changes its behavior before it disappears. A cardinal that stops singing, a chickadee that sits lower than usual, a robin that isn't moving with its normal energy. These are signals. You cannot save every bird, but you can notice when something has changed. And sometimes, a feeder that's been cleaned, a cat that's been kept inside for a week, a water source that's been kept fresh, is exactly what a struggling bird needed to recover. Second, leave the messy corners alone. The brush pile, the leaf pile, the dense hedge you've been meaning to trim, these are not failures of yard maintenance. They are the most valuable habitat you offer. A bird in decline needs cover. A bird surviving a cold night needs cover. A bird raising young needs cover. The tidiest yards are often the quietest, not because birds don't want to be there, because there is nowhere safe for them to go. Third, add native plants wherever you can. Dr. Douglas Tallamy at the University of Delaware has spent decades documenting the relationship between native plants and bird survival. His research shows that a single native oak tree supports over 500 species of caterpillars, the primary food source for nearly every backyard bird during breeding season. An ornamental tree of similar size supports fewer than 5. You cannot control what happens to birds once they leave your yard, but you can control whether your yard is the kind of place a bird can survive, and that difference between a yard that sustains life and a yard that only decorates it may matter more than any feeder you ever fill. The birds in your yard are not permanent. They are passing through a life that is brief, metabolically intense, and lived almost entirely at the edge of what is survivable. Every bird you see at your feeder this morning has already survived things you will never know about. A hawk, a cold night with no shelter, a disease that almost took hold, and it came back to your yard anyway. The fact that you never find them dead is not a comfort exactly. It is something more specific than that. It is evidence that the world your birds live in, the hidden world just outside your window, is far more complete, far more ancient, and far more carefully arranged than it appears. You are watching the surface of something very deep. And the more you understand of it, the more remarkable that cardinal at your feeder becomes. Tell me in the comments, have you ever found a dead bird in your yard? Where was it? And what species was it? I read every single one. If this changed the way you see your yard, subscribe to Backyard Bird Whisper. Because the most extraordinary wildlife on Earth isn't in a jungle, it's 12 feet from your kitchen window. And next week, that crow has been watching your yard for months. It knows your face, it knows your schedule. It knows which neighbors feed birds and which ones don't. What it has decided about you, and what it does with that information, is one of the most unsettling things in backyard bird science. I'll see you there.